Hello and welcome back everybody to the Finding Hope with OMS webinar series. Joining me for the fifth session in this series, the OMS Diet, A Practical Guide. My name's Sian Southwold and I'm the Head of Programmes here at OMS, and I'm joining you from near London in the UK. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Great to see so many of you back and joining us for this session. In a moment, I'll pass you over to our presenters, Gillian, Robertson and Ashley Madden. In the meantime, just a note to say that the session is, of course, being recorded and the replay will be available after the session via the link that's sent through to all registrants. The webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes with some Q&A at the end. You'll also notice that because it is a Zoom webinar, it's not as interactive. There's no sort of video or audio component for our attendees, but you will be able to post questions through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And we've also received some questions ahead of the session, which we'll hope to get to later. If somebody has already posted a question, you can press the upvote button if you like it. If you are experiencing any technical issues, then we just suggest logging out and then rejoining the webinar, and that should sort it out. We've tried to make this session as accessible as possible. You'll see that there's subtitles at the bottom of the screen. If they bother you, you don't want to see them, there is an option to take those off. Just some post-webinar updates. There will be a short survey that pops up at the end. That's just to help us with some feedback. And we should also be doing, for those that you have joined us before, we'll also be doing a couple of live poll sessions, and that's quite straightforward. It will just pop up on your screen. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome onto the screen Gillian and Ashley, who will be joining me now. Hi both.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi everybody.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good.
Great. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you both. And like I said, I'll be managing the polls in the background as we've sort of discussed, and then I'll pop up at the end to field some of the questions that we've been receiving through the session. So good luck, and we look forward to hearing what you've both got to say.
Okay, thank you, Sian. I'm just going to share my screen here now, and I hope that's good. Can everybody see that now? Yeah, great. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We are going to be talking today about practical ways that will help you to adopt the OMS diet recommendations. And we thought we would just start by introducing ourselves.
Perfect. Thank you, Gillian. So hi, everyone. So happy to be with you. My name is Ashley Madden. I am a plant-based chef, or I should say I'm a pharmacist turned plant-based chef, holistic nutritionist, and cookbook author. And I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS in 2008. And started the OMS program in about 2011. And in changing my own diet and lifestyle, I realized that my true passion was food and its connection to health. And I am Canadian, but I currently live in Taipei in Taiwan with my husband and my newborn son.
Thank you, Ashley. So hi, I'm Gillian Robertson. I'm actually British, but I've been living in Switzerland now for around the last 18 years. I have always been interested in food. And in fact, a few years ago, I changed my career and I retrained as a chef. And I now have a small business here in the ski resort where we live. I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS in 2017, and I started following the OMS program pretty much straight away. And then last year I started to volunteer for Overcoming MS, and I now contribute recipes to the website. So we've got quite a packed agenda for you today. What we really want to do is help you with practical ways as to how we can adopt the recommendations of the OMS diet. So we're going to start by going through an overview of what we should and shouldn't be eating to follow the recommendations. And then we're going to start to look in a bit more detail at a plant-based diet. We're also going to cover replacing dairy, and we're going to look at oils and oil-free cooking. And then from a practical point of view, we're also going to look at how you can simplify your meal preparation. We'd like to cover following the OMS diet on a budget, because I know that that's a sort of a hot topic, and also look at the kinds of foods that you can have in your store cupboard to help you make quick and easy meals. And of course, as Sian said, there'll be some time at the end to cover your questions. So what I'd like to do is start by having a look at what we really mean by the OMS diet. The OMS diet is backed up by scientific research, and it is a really important part of the program when it comes to managing the disease and preventing progression. There's a lot of information about the science behind the diet on the OMS website, so we're not going to be going into that today. But in the handouts that will be available at the end, you will have all the necessary links in case you want to go and look at that and read about that in more detail in your own time. So what we really mean by the OMS diet is a whole food plant-based diet, including seafood if you want to do that. And what we're doing by eating in this way is significantly reducing our saturated fat intake, and at the same time increasing the intake of healthy omega-3 fats, because those have an anti-inflammatory effect on the body, which is very important for multiple sclerosis. So if we start to look at all of the foods that we can enjoy, and we start with the plant-based ones. So we have vegetables and fruits, we have whole grains such as pasta, rice, noodles, but also other grains like barley, quinoa, and so on. Pulses, so we mean beans and peas and lentils. Seeds, nuts, and nut butters. Plant-based milk alternatives and yogurt, and soy products like tofu and tempeh. And then for those of you who want to add in fish, then we have fish and other seafoods such as prawns, mussels, octopus, squid, and so on. And then we also have egg whites, which are allowed, not egg yolks, but egg whites. I think it's just useful to talk here about one or two things we should be a little bit careful about. And I've mentioned here olives and avocado, which we should eat in small amounts because of the saturated fat content. Also nuts and nut butters. Again, eating those in small quantities is important. And in the same way, oily fish, because it's great for the omega-3s, but because it also has saturated fat, we suggest that we limit that to no more than 3 times a week. And then finally, on top of this very wide range of foods that we can have, we also recommend that you supplement your food with a daily dose of flaxseed oil, around 20 to 40 ml, which is about 2 or 3 tablespoons. And that should be eaten in its natural state, so we shouldn't be using that for cooking or baking. So those are all the foods we can eat. What about the foods we need to avoid? Well, we should not be eating meat or meat products. We should be avoiding all dairy, all saturated fats, and that's not just animal fats, but we have to remember that coconut oil, palm oil, other vegetable oils also are considered as saturated fats. And then because we're also not only are we trying to cut down on saturated fat, but we're trying to follow a whole food way of eating, then we want to avoid a lot of processed foods like fried and deep fried foods, baked goods, all those snacks like chips and crisps and party foods and sweets and chocolate, fast food and takeaways. And as I mentioned before, we should avoid egg yolks. And then also just a note to remember, as I said, coconut oil, but all coconut products, peanuts and peanut butter, we're best to avoid those completely because of the saturated fat content. Now, I know that this seems like a tall order, especially when you're starting out on trying to adapt your diet to the OMS recommendations. But what we hope to show you in the rest of the time that we have with you today is that you can actually have some delicious meals and a great way of eating without all these foods.
Okay, so as Gillian said, the OMS diet is a plant-based diet plus seafood and egg whites if you want. I know that many of us get really interested in plant-based nutrition. Some of us follow a purely or predominantly plant-based diet. I know for me, I did fish and egg whites too for a little while, and then it just naturally occurred to me to shift to a plant-based diet. So I'm hoping today that I can answer some plant-based questions, inspire some plant-based kitchen creativity, and kind of hit some important points. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what is a plant-based diet? And Gillian really just, I guess, hit on what the components of a plant-based diet is. So as a refresher, a plant-based diet is a diet that is focused on minimally processed whole plant foods. So the plant-based food groups, if you will, are whole grains, beans and legumes or pulses, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, and seaweeds. And I just want to take a moment here to differentiate between plant-based and vegan, because I know the terminology can be confusing. I should add vegetarian in there as well, actually, but I know the terminology can be a bit confusing, especially if you're navigating recipes or new food products. So vegan or a vegan diet is one that is free of animal products. So a vegan diet isn't health driven by definition. It certainly can be, but you know, a soda and a bag of chips or a bag of crisps can be considered vegan. Whereas a plant-based diet really is rooted in health, and the minimally processed, minimally added oils is really central to the idea of a plant-based diet. So I just wanted to highlight that. And I also want to talk about the benefits of a plant-based diet. And again, plant-based nutrition is weaved into the OMS program, so a lot of you are familiar with this, but a plant-based diet is high in essential nutrients like vitamins, minerals, and fiber. It's overall anti-inflammatory because we're getting a lot of antioxidants from all those colorful plant foods. It's low in saturated fat, which is important for us, of course. And then also, a plant-based diet has extensive health benefits that go beyond, I guess, for us, how it can benefit an autoimmune disease. For example, a plant-based diet has been shown to reduce the risk of some cancers. It can help with weight loss or weight stabilization. And it can also decrease the risk and sometimes reverse some of the modern day chronic diseases that we're seeing in a lot of the developed countries. So things like type 2 diabetes and heart disease. You can go to the next slide, Gillian. Actually, I think this is where we were going to do a poll, a plant-based poll, if I'm correct, Sean. Here we go. Okay, so we just kind of wanted to see, get a lay of the land kind of situation and see what your experience is already with a plant-based diet. So what is your relationship with a plant-based diet, or which applies most to you? The first one is I'm very knowledgeable about plant-based nutrition and have no problem coming up with meals. The second is I'm somewhat familiar with plant-based nutrition and meal planning, but would like to know more. The third is I struggle with plant-based meal planning, and the fourth is I'm not very interested in plant-based meals or nutrition. So I'm not sure if we get a live toll of that.
Yeah, we will do. I'll just give people a couple of seconds more.
Sure. Okay, so I'm somewhat familiar with plant-based nutrition and meal planning, but want to know more is almost half of the audience. That's fantastic because that's what we're going to be talking about. And for those of you who are already feel confident about plant-based nutrition and meal planning, hopefully you get some more ideas from this presentation. And there's a lot of things in our handouts as well. So I'll reference that as we go through. Okay, so I can return back to the slides now. Perfect. Okay. So now that we've defined a plant-based diet and why it's beneficial for us health-wise, I want to hone in on plant-based protein because I know protein is such a dietary hot topic. And if you follow a plant-based diet or if you like eating plant-based meals, because a lot of this, you know, this applies to you if you're just interested in plant-based meals as well. It doesn't mean you have to be predominantly plant-based. But the question that comes up so often is if you don't eat meat and if you don't eat fish, if you don't eat eggs, where do you get your protein? And the short answer is everywhere because all foods have some protein and you can get all the protein that you need from a plant-based diet. And so research and nutritional studies that have been done are telling us now that if you eat enough calories, you're most certainly getting enough protein. So a protein deficiency, even if you're vegan or you follow a plant-based diet, is extremely rare. So that's a really important point to remember. And I have listed here the recommended daily intake of protein. And this is just to show you how reasonable and achievable these numbers are. And of course, the amount that you need to consume varies with your age and your activity level or your health situation. For example, if you're pregnant, you need to eat more protein. But the truth is that we've become a protein obsessed society, really. And there's a lot of protein products, protein powders, supplements, cookies, diet plans. You know, there's a lot of protein heavy media coming at us, and it's just not necessary. So I just don't want that to be a point of stress for anybody. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Ooh, why is that not? There we go.
So even though plant-based protein is good for us and we can get enough protein, there are some important differences that I just want to point out. So animal protein is different than plant protein. And now this isn't a bad thing. This is actually a good thing. So you may have heard the term complete protein. This is a term that refers to a protein source that offers all 9 essential amino acids. If you don't know what that is, I'm going to quickly just give you an overview. So amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and we need protein for so many things in our body, for our metabolism, for maintenance, repair, and growth. So the essential amino acids are the ones that we have to get from our diet because our body can't make them on their own. And animal proteins offer all of the essential amino acids, and is known as complete protein, whereas plant foods only offer some of the essential amino acids, but different plants offer different essential amino acids. So what modern science has taught us is that the amino acid gaps in one plant food are filled in by another plant food. So if that all seems very confusing, don't worry about it. I just want to make sure that you understand the bottom line is that you don't need to strategically pair plant foods at specific meals to get the protein that you need. We now know that eating a variety of whole plant foods will get you all of the essential amino acids that are required. We can go to the next slide. And just to show you how easy this pairing happens and how naturally it happens anyways, again, you don't need to strategically do this, but I have here listed just some simple meal and snack ideas that actually do offer you complete protein that you're probably already doing and don't even know it. So brown rice and beans, oatmeal and nuts and seeds or soy milk. Sprouted bread is a great one because it has a combination of legumes and grains and nuts. and hummus on whole wheat toast. So these are pretty easy things. And then just to add a little cherry on top, and I'm probably going to confuse people a little bit, but in the previous slide, I said most plants don't have complete protein, but there actually are a handful that do. So soy and soy products like tempeh, tofu, miso, soy milk, these do offer complete protein, as does quinoa and buckwheat, which are pseudo grains, and chia and hemp seeds. So these foods are pretty easy to incorporate as well. Again, just kind of highlighting the idea that it is easy to get complete protein and all the required protein we need on a plant-based diet. And on the next slide, I have listed here just some foods or some plants from each food group that are a bit more concentrated in protein. I'm not going to go through this list. In your handout, there will be a little list of like high protein plant foods. But I just want to point out here that the legume family and the soy family are really great, as are whole grain products, especially things like whole grain pasta and whole grain breads. These can actually be quite substantially high in protein. And then just a final note on this slide is vegetables. I think there is a myth maybe that vegetables don't have any protein, but they actually do, especially when you look at their protein content relative to their calories. So for example, something like broccoli. So broccoli, 2 cups of broccoli, or about 180 grams, offers 6 grams of protein, which is pretty impressive. So don't count out vegetables for protein either. And so I guess when we're talking about plant-based protein, what I want to get across is that you don't need to look for protein-specific products or recipes. Keep your meals simple, focus on whole foods. Again, you don't need to strategically pair plant foods to get complete protein, and cook from home so that you can control the ingredients that you're adding. So in talking about plant-based protein, I think we also have to talk about meat alternatives, because these are so popular right now. And I know that, science or food science is coming up with all kinds of meat substitutes, and they're becoming widely available. And I know a lot of us, in looking for convenience, because a lot of these are just packaged and you just cook them quickly at home, are wondering if we can have them, or if they're healthy, or if they're approved by the OMS Diet. So first, I just want to define a meat alternative. So it's usually a term that refers to protein-rich foods, but it most often is used to describe a food or food product that mimics a traditional meat serving. So in the next slide, I have some examples. So packaged burgers like Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger, I know these are so popular right now. Processed meats, soy products especially, like fake bacon and sausages and deli meats, and really anything that mimics a meat product. And meat alternatives are super exciting, especially as people are trying to move to a meat-free diet. It's great for the environment, but in a nutshell, meat alternatives are generally not that good for us. They're usually made with a lot of artificial ingredients, especially highly processed oils, and they usually have a lot of fat, saturated fat especially, which again, we're trying to avoid, sugar, salt, calories, and overall, most of these packaged meat substitutes are highly inflammatory. So that is a bit disappointing for some people, but keep in mind that food products or new food products are coming out all the time, and there are health conscious companies out there. So keep an eye out for new products, but I would always urge you to look at the label just to make sure you know what's in the product in question. So instead, it's best if you stick with whole food meat alternatives. So high protein foods that you can use at home to make your own meat substitutes. So you can make your own burgers or your own meatballs or your own meat sauce. So focus on things like tofu, tempeh, beans, also seitan, which I haven't talked about, but seitan, it's pronounced differently depending on where you are, but it's also known as wheat meat. So it's essentially a meat substitute that's just made from gluten. So you can't, if you're on a gluten-free diet, it's not an option, but if you are, it is usually a fat-free source of plant-based protein. And then finally, I just want to note that it's also really helpful to ditch the old notion that your dinner plate is focused on one main protein food and is surrounded by side dishes. I know that's how we traditionally look at a meal, because the anatomy of a plant-based plate or bowl is quite different than the traditional dinner plate. But with some experience and after trying some recipes or making some meals on your own, you do get used to it, and your brain almost shifts and you don't think about the anatomy of a plate the way you used to. And then finally, if you are really interested in trying a meat alternative, again, I'll just reiterate to read the label and make sure you're not getting any ingredients that you are trying to avoid, like too much salt, too much oil, or dairy. And I think that's going to be a common thread throughout this presentation, is always checking the ingredient label. Now we're going to move on to talking about dairy, because removing dairy is, of course, one of the main dietary pillars of the OMS program. And I know that initially it can be very challenging, or it can seem like it's going to be very challenging, but there are so many options today. So I'm briefly going to review replacing milk, yogurt, cheese, and ice cream. So first, let's talk about milk. So the market for plant-based milks has exploded over the last 5 or 10 years. I know when I first started eating this way, you know, there was one option at the grocery store, and sometimes I had to order it from away. But now the milk section of most grocery stores is, you know, just has so many options. So that's wonderful. And most dairy alternatives or plant-based milks are OMS friendly. And I say most because, again, you want to read the label and make sure there's not any added oils or too much sugar. In your handout, I have a quick plant-based milk guide with just some important notes, but I will say here that there are some brands that do add sunflower oil or canola oil to their milks, and a lot of these are also barista blends, so milks that are used for like lattes and that kind of thing. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the only milk that is a hard no is coconut milk, which Gillian has touched on already, with coconut and coconut products not being an option on the OMS program. And then similarly with yogurt, today there are so many options. Soy yogurt is great. You can get unsweetened varieties, which is wonderful. And then there are nut yogurts as well. So you can get almond yogurt and cashew yogurt. I would just note to watch out for too many added sweeteners, especially in almond milk yogurt. That's been my experience. And then you can also make your own. So you can make your own yogurts using a yogurt maker. You can also do that with a blender. So I like to make cashew yogurt in my Vitamix. And there are so many recipes online as well. And then if you're someone who likes having yogurt like in the morning or with granola as a snack, I think that it's a great idea to experiment with chia pudding and overnight oats. These kind of serve the same purpose. They're really easy to make. And I have a link to a couple of recipes in your handouts as well if you're interested. Next, we're going to talk about cheese. And I know cheese is a really tough one for people. And in the same vein as when we talked about meat alternatives, there are a lot of cheese alternatives that are available commercially now as well. Unfortunately, most of the vegan cheeses on the market also aren't great options. Most of them are made with oils, especially a lot of coconut oil, so they're very high in saturated fat. And a lot of the melty cheeses that you can get that are vegan, they are usually made with a lot of highly processed soy. So there might be some smaller brands where you are that offer oil-free cheeses. I know where I am, I have found a cheese company that makes vegan cheeses that don't have any added oils, which is amazing. But you can also make substitutes or find ways to replace them at home. So if you've never heard of nutritional yeast, this is a great ingredient to have at home. And I think Gillian will touch on this later as well. But it's a pantry item, and it's yellow flakes. It's deactivated yeast that's grown on molasses. It's not related to yeast that's used to brew beer or to make bread. And it's pretty widely available now. And it has this cheesy taste, and it's great for adding to seasonings or making sauces with. Again, I've linked to some recipes in your handouts where you'll see that that's used quite often. Nuts like cashews are also great if you're trying to make like a cheese sauce for macaroni and cheese. I have a sweet potato cheese sauce in your handout package as well. And then other nuts can also be used to make cheese substitutes like cheese balls or cheese fermented soft cheeses. And as Gillian has noted earlier in the presentation, we do want to keep an eye on how many nuts we're consuming because of the saturated fat content. but these are really great options for special occasions for sure. So in my cookbook, I don't think I've said the name of it yet, the plant-based cookbook, vegan, gluten-free, oil-free recipes for lifelong health. It's a mouthful, but in there I have a cheese ball recipe that I make every Christmas. It's made with walnuts and cashews. So just these kinds of things can be nice to have when you're looking for something for a special occasion, because I know cheese is something that we miss. And then I'm going to move on to ice cream, which was really difficult for me because I loved ice cream so much, but this is probably one of the easiest ones to replace. So when I think about replacing ice cream, I think of three options. The first is that there are commercially available ice cream brands now that are made with soy, almond, or cashew milk. I would just, again, refer to the label to make sure there isn't too much added sugar or oils or artificial ingredients. And again, avoid coconut milk-based ice creams. There's also sorbet, which is just pureed fruit and sugar, which you can also get commercially, but is pretty easy to make at home. You just blend up some fruit, frozen fruit, and you can add in what you want. You can add a splash of almond milk, or you can add sweeteners if that's what you're into. And then for me, the best alternative is banana ice cream, which is also known as nice cream. So nice cream is just pureed frozen bananas, and it is an amazing ice cream substitute. I make mine at home using a high-speed blender, so I use a Vitamix blender, but you can get banana ice cream devoted machines. I know people have those as well. And then you can add in your own flavors to make it how you want it. So you can add cocoa powder, you can add flavoring extracts, you can add other fruit. So there's lots of options there. And so now I'm going to move on to talking about oils, because this is another important nutritional topic on the OMS program. And I know that there's always questions about oils and which ones we can have and which ones we can't. And again, Gillian has already talked about this. So just to put it in black and white and very simply, oils that are approved on the OMS diet are, of course, flax oil, not for cooking. Extra virgin olive oil, which we can use for baking, also for drizzling or seasoning or salad dressings in limited amounts. And then there are others that can be used as flavorings or seasonings as well. So various nut and seed oils, and these should be bought, high quality and purchased as fresh as possible and in small quantities as well. And just a note here for anybody who's new on the OMS program, keep your flax oil in the fridge. Or any polyunsaturated oil or that's high in omega-3 should be kept in the fridge. And then your other oils as well should be kept somewhere dark, cold, and in closed dark containers, because we know that when oils are exposed to light, heat, or oxygen, they can go bad or go rancid is another way of saying that. So in talking about oils, I know that there is a gray area sometimes that's open for interpretation, and that's cooking with oils outside of baking. So the problem with stir frying, sauteing, or pan frying with oil is that the pan definitely gets really hot and can destroy the beneficial nutrients or the beneficial fats that are in oils. So something I started doing very early on in the OMS program was doing almost 100% of my cooking oil-free. And you can do baking oil-free, you can do roasting oil-free, but I specifically want to talk about pan frying or sauteing. But first, I just want to talk to you about what the benefits are of oil-free cooking. So when you remove oil from your cooking, you're automatically lowering your fat and your saturated fat intake, which is fantastic for us. You're automatically getting a lower calorie intake because there's 100+ calories in just a tablespoon of oil, depending on the oil. You're lowering your omega-6 intake. So remember that our inflammation in our body is controlled by the balance between the omega-6 and the omega-3 fat. So we want to increase our omega-3s and reduce our omega-6s. And a lot of cooking oils are high in omega-6 fats. And it's overall a healthier option. It's cheap, and I think it's a really important culinary skill to have. So on the next slide, I'm just briefly reviewing how you saute without oil, because a lot of recipes start with sauteing onions and garlic in some oil, or sauteing vegetables in some oil. And this can be for anything from soups and stews and casseroles. So I think it's an important thing to know how to do. So To saute without oil, you simply replace the oil with something like water or another liquid like vegetable broth, vinegar, juice, soy sauce. And you continue stirring as you would cooking, and then you just add more liquid as the liquid in the pan evaporates. The easiest way to do this for me is to just keep a glass of water or a measuring cup of water next to the stove and gradually add it as needed. I will note that there are probably 2 drawbacks to oil-free cooking or oil-free sauteing if you've never done it before. And the first is that you might not get that caramelization that you get on foods when they're cooked in oil, which you'll quickly get used to. And then the second one is that you might burn your food or get burn spots in your pan. And that's just because you either have the temperature too high or you've forgotten to add liquid. But again, you'll get used to that as you cook more without oils. And, you know, okay, so moving on to the next slide. We're talking about practical tips here for the OMS.
And Ashley, hi. Here we were just before you go on to do that. We thought
yes.
we'd have
Right. Yes.
a polling question.
Yes.
So Sian, if you have that one. So I think, yeah, before we go on to talk about simplifying meal preparation, we'd be interested in just looking at how you as the audience see the biggest challenges when following this recommended diet. So we have feeling confident about which foods to eat and which to avoid, having the time required to prepare meals, making OMS friendly meals that the whole family want to eat, and or is it managing the cost and your food bills? So we'll give you a couple of minutes there. It'd be great if you can vote on that question. So results coming in. So that's interesting. So we have there making OMS friendly meals that the whole family like as being the biggest challenge there. I mean, I'm hoping that when we talking about meal preparation now, we're going to be covering that in a bit more detail. And then, yeah, so managing cost and food bills there is not so much of an issue with our audience today. So more about which foods to eat and which to avoid, which we've talked a little bit about now, and time required to prepare meals. So let's see if we can cover off some of those topics now in the rest of the webinar between us, Ashley.
Okay, great. So this slide, you know, this whole presentation is about practical tips on the OMS diet, and I think we've hit on some of these already, and I know Gillian is going to talk more about them, and this list is also in your handouts as well. So I just want to highlight a couple here that I think are really important. So the first is make a meal plan, and I mean make a very simple meal plan, especially in the beginning, and this can be something as easy as jot notes or a list, you know, oatmeal for breakfast, salad for lunch, pasta for dinner. But I just think that having a simple meal plan removes a lot of the indecision we feel right before a meal, which can lead to stress and can also lead to poor food choices. That's from my experience anyways. And then keep your meals so simple in the beginning, very basic meals based on whole foods. And when you do go to try new recipes, look for, you know, 1 pot, 30-minute sheet pan meals, which are so important, or sorry, so popular right now as well. And I think I have links to some similar recipes in your handouts. And then this one is probably not in most how to simplify meal prep lists that you'll find, but number 4, making a sauce and keeping it in your fridge. So a lot of my rushed weeknight meals or meals where I don't want to be messing around in the kitchen very much are grains that I already have made in the fridge, reheated with just steamed vegetables or salad. So a sauce can really dress up the most simplest of meals. So I have links to some oil-free sauces in your handouts, and there's several in the cookbook as well. But I just think that's a tip that really helps simplify and cut down on time when you need a meal in a short period of time. And then batch cooking is another really important one as well. I think Gillian's going to touch on that, but batch cooking things and freezing them for future use is super important. So in the next slide, which is the final slide for me, I I hope I haven't been talking too much. I wanted to just highlight, these are 4 meal ideas that I go to when I'm short on time and I want it to be delicious but easy. So the first is grain bowls, which is what I just described, which is just a bowl or a plate where the base of the meal is cooked whole grains. And then I just kind of add whatever I have in the fridge on top: salad, steamed vegetables, a handful of chickpeas. And then you can use a sauce or a drizzle of soy sauce or a squeeze of citrus, something really easy. The second is baked potatoes. I think anything goes with baked potatoes. So I'll bake a potato. If I'm in a rush, I will use the microwave to bake the potato, and I'll stuff it with leftover stew, or I'll put a handful of arugula or rocket with a drizzle of flax oil, just something really easy. Tofu scramble and avocado toast. This is probably my favorite meal, and it comes together in minutes. I have a link to a recipe in your handouts as well. And then one pot pasta is a great family meal. And that's where you put the pasta and all the veggies and everything in the one pot. You boil it, drain it, and then just add a simple sauce, or again, a drizzle of oil or soy sauce or a sauce that you already have made. So these are my top simple meal ideas, and these and more are also listed in the handouts as well.
Thank you, Ashley. So I think that if you start to already adopt some of these ideas about making meal plans, you can certainly make things easier for yourself. But I think also the equipment that you have in your kitchen can also cut down on preparation time. And what I've done here is give you a list of a few basic things which I think are really essential, especially when you're following a plant-based diet, and then some ideas for things that are more of an investment. So really, when we're looking at basic things, then obviously a few good quality knives and a vegetable peeler are going to be really useful. Keeping them sharp makes chopping much easier. And to go with that, I would say a non-slip chopping board. I mean, if it's not specifically non-slip, you can get these mats which are like a non-slip mat, which you put under your chopping board, and not only does it make it safe, it speeds up the cutting process. On top of that, a grater is a great idea, and a microplane, which is really a very fine grater, really useful for things like grating garlic, ginger, zesting lemons. If you're going to be doing home baking, then measuring cups and spoons are great. And if you are going to start batch cooking, then of course containers and jars are really useful for keeping things in the fridge or freezer. And then, as Ashley said, with oil-free cooking, it's really a good idea to have some non-stick frying pans. And also an oven tray is great for oil-free or minimum oil baking. If you don't have non-stick, you can still use baking parchment for baking, or you can get silicone mats which stop food from sticking, and they can be used over and over again. On the more sort of expensive side, then I would say the least expensive item which would be great to have would be a stick blender or a hand blender, as we call them, which are great for blending soups, for blending smoothies. You can make purees with them. And at the other end of that scale on the blending side is a high-speed blender. Ashley's already mentioned she has a Vitamix, and so do I. And I use it all the time. I think it's the thing I use the most in the kitchen. It just does everything: soups, sauces, purees. It'll make you your nice cream. And if you're adventurous, you can make your plant-based milk with it. I mean, it is an investment, but it's a very, very useful tool in the kitchen. Probably a little less expensive would be a food processor. Again, slicing, chopping, shredding vegetables, great for mixing things like veggie burgers or making hummus. And as Ashley also mentioned, the microwave. And I know that there's a lot of debate about whether using a microwave is safe or not. But I think if you have one, you're short on time. It's great for steaming vegetables or steaming fish. Great for reheating food if you're doing food prep. So don't be afraid of using it. I would just say make sure that the containers you use in it are microwave safe, and I just try to avoid using plastic in it. So following the OMS diet on a budget, actually this came out just now with the audience as the least of your challenges, but I do think it's just worth mentioning that switching to the OMS diet does not have to cost more. I think people can often think, oh, you know, it's going to take a lot of very special ingredients and ingredients that are maybe difficult to find, and how am I going to do this without it getting too expensive? But I think if you can already start to think about meal planning, this idea of batch cooking, freezing and using up leftovers, that's all going to reduce cost. And I think, you know, other ideas to reduce waste. I mean, if you're storing your food properly to make it last, things like bread, I know that's one of the things that is thrown away the most in households. Just slice it and freeze it, and it's there all the time for toast or a quick snack. Keep a track of your use-by dates in your cupboard. Don't let things fester at the back of the cupboard. Try and use them up. And be flexible when it comes to your meal plans and recipes that you want to try. You don't have to follow a recipe and use every single ingredient, but get creative and incorporate ingredients you already have, or swap some ingredients out. And other ideas for the more adventurous of you out there, I mean, you can consider growing your own herbs. Very simple to do outside or inside in the winter. It saves you buying those packets that you only use about a quarter of, and then you end up throwing them away. And then, you know, if you do invest in a blender, then have a go at making your own plant-based milks or yogurts. They do work out a lot cheaper than buying some of the brands that you can get now in the supermarkets. I've have listed for you quite a long list here of how to shop smart, because I think this is really one of the big areas where you can really watch what you're spending. And I'm not going to go through this list now today as time is ticking on, but it will be there for you in the handouts. Perhaps a few of the main things to point out: make a list from your meal plan and stick to it. And if you're trying to just shop once a week, then you're less tempted to buy all of these extras. Shopping online, which I think a lot of people are doing a lot more of since the pandemic started. It can be a great way of shopping when you're watching the pennies. I mean, you can look out for the best deals. You can add up what you're shopping as you go along before you get to the checkout. You can save a weekly basket and then just reorder that every week. It's a really good way of saving money and saving time. And another point I would just say also is organic now is a big trend, obviously. It can be very expensive. Don't feel that you always have to buy organic. As long as you're washing your fruit and vegetables well, you're going to be okay. And it's okay to look at frozen fruit and vegetables as well as fresh ones. These are often cheaper. They're just as nutritious, and they can help save time because they're often pre-prepared as well. And the same goes with fish too. I mean, frozen fish can also be much more economical. And if you're adding them to a curry or a stew or maybe a sauce for pasta, it really doesn't matter that it's not fresh. So I'll leave you to look at those ideas about shopping smart in the handouts after the webinar today. But just to finish about talking about ideas for feeding family on a budget, I think if you start thinking about the inexpensive items in plant-based cooking, so grains, pulses, seasonal vegetables, if you make those the base of your meals, then your meals really are not going to cost that much money. And what I've listed here are some ideas for each mealtime to sort of get you started in thinking about what you could do. Breakfast, I mean, as Ashley's already mentioned, overnight oats, quick and easy to make, inexpensive, or you can make porridge in the winter. Making your own muesli and granola is way cheaper than some of the really expensive brands out there, and you're making sure that you're not getting any sort of additives or unwanted ingredients. Big batches of homemade baked beans are great to have on toast. They're simple to make. They make a good lunch dish as well. And then for lunches, things like pasta salads, Ashley's favorite baked potatoes are great. Tuna and sweet corn, simple thing to have on baked potato. Or soups, which you can really fortify with beans and grains. They're filling and they're cheap to make. Dinners, stir fry, the oil-free way, of course, with noodles, or make a big batch of lentil bolognese and have that with your favorite pasta. One of my favorites is chickpea curry. I love chickpea curry, and you can have that with rice. I like to make it with flatbread, but rice, whole grain rice, is very simple as a dinner idea. And then sweet treats, fruit-based things like baked apples with yogurt, or the ever popular banana bread, or a rice pudding, or fruit crumble with yogurt. I mean, I think by opting to follow the OMS diet, you're already saving a lot of money by cutting out expensive items like meat and dairy products and ready-made meals. So I think it is possible to do this without it getting really expensive. So then finally, to finish up, we just wanted to talk about the store cupboard, the idea of having things on hand so that you can always put a meal together when you're short on time or you can't get to the shops. As we've said all the way through this webinar, when you're buying packaged goods, I think it's really important that you get into the habit of checking labels, just making sure that there aren't additional ingredients there that you don't want. And then if you're using some of these packaged items along with some fresh fruit, vegetables and seafood if you want to, then you're going to be having a balanced diet. And what we've actually done for you is put together a store cupboard list of things that that are OMS friendly. It's quite a comprehensive list. We absolutely are not suggesting that you go out and buy every item on that list, but that you use it as a basis and look at what sort of things are available where you live and what kind of things your family like to eat. As I said, that's going to be a handout for you. We've split it out into different food groups so that you can easily find things on there like dairy alternatives, tinned items, pasta, noodles, and so on. There's a section on home baking ingredients if you want to have a go at OMS friendly home baking, and so on. And we've also included some frozen food ideas, and we've included fresh vegetables like potatoes and onions and garlic, which actually, if you keep them in a cool, dark, dry place, they'll easily keep for a couple of weeks. So just to sum up then, that's an awful lot of information we've given you today, a lot to take in, a lot of practical tips and ideas. But really what we hope we've done today is help you to feel confident about which foods you can eat and which foods to avoid when following the recommendations, what meals you can make at home, what things are okay to buy pre-made so that you can easily incorporate plant-based protein. To understand how you can simplify your meal planning and reduce your meal preparation time, how to follow the recommendations without it costing you a fortune, and some ideas about what kind of foods are useful to keep in your store cupboard. And as I said at the beginning, we didn't cover too much the science behind the OMS diet today, but in the handouts, you'll have links to where you can go off and read about that in more detail if that's something you're interested in doing. So thank you for listening to Ashley and I today. I think we do just have a little bit of time for questions. So I will hand you back over to Sian.
Thank you both. Thanks, Gillian and Ashley. A very, very informative session. We can tell by the amount of questions that we've had coming through in the background. I must say thank you to Sophie, who's been fielding most of those. I should have mentioned her earlier. You're right, we have got a few minutes left where we can just go through a couple of questions. I think it's probably worth saying that due to the volume that we've got, we normally just post up 10 frequently asked questions, but we'll probably try and cover maybe up to 20 on there because there's some quite specific ones. So I'm pleased that you've referenced that all the handouts and the PowerPoint and the replay will be available, and the questions that we don't get round to today. So I'm just going to start with some of the ones that we've received. Just starting with, what would be your top tip for OMS dishes that are really suitable for home freezing?
Ashley, do you want to start with that, or?
Sorry, I had myself on mute. Yes, of course. Yes. Okay. So again, as Gillian and I both said, the freezer is so helpful in saving time. So that's a great question. So I think the best things to freeze, I'm literally going through right now my own deep freeze to see what I have there. So baked goods actually freeze really well. So things like banana bread, muffins, if you're making OMS friendly cakes, pre-slice them and then freeze them. So I definitely make batches of muffins and then freeze them and then take one to go for breakfast. Soups and stews freeze perfectly. That's probably the number one thing in my freezer are different batches of soups and stews. Casseroles freeze really well. The only thing that I would say that I think, and also I guess it depends on your standards. I feel like I freeze everything, but I don't think pasta freezes very well. So sometimes if you're thinking about how to simplify a recipe, I would think about the components of a recipe, freeze the pasta sauce, make the pasta fresh. If you're looking for fresh vegetables, make the sauce separate, then use the fresh vegetables. But you can also make and freeze, if you cook beans at home, which I do because it's a lot cheaper, you cook them from dry just by boiling them in water. Those can be frozen. Just cover them in the cooking liquid and they can be frozen. And you can also freeze whole grains as well and just let them thaw overnight in the fridge. So I think there are a lot of things that you can freeze, but those are probably my top tips.
Yeah, I would also add pasta sauces are great, or something like, you know, something like a plant-based bolognese sauce, because you can just use it for so many things. Yeah,
true.
Thank you. Some good tips there. Somebody would like to know some tips on traveling. So traveling and then following the OMS diet, you know, what you're not then actually able to cook your own because you're out and about or you're away or you're on holiday.
I feel like I currently live in Taiwan, and pretty soon I'm making like a 27-hour trek back to Canada. So I can speak to this. And, you know, when I first started the OMS diet, I was afraid that I would have to stop traveling because my husband and I traveled quite a bit. But I think the easiest thing to do is to think about things that don't need to be cooked and that can be kept out of the fridge for a long time. So as Gillian mentioned earlier, I always travel with homemade granola or muesli. And then when I'm in the airport through security, I'll buy soy milk at Starbucks if I have to, and then I'll just put it together and that can be breakfast. I always bring a muffin or bread that I have, and you can put like nut butter on it or some kind of like jams, a low sugar jam. That's something that I take with me quite often. And then the other meal that I kind of take with me wherever I go, if I'm somewhere where I don't think I'm going to be able to buy something that's OMS friendly, is a salad to go. Crumble up a bean burger or some cooked tempeh or tofu into a salad and just bring it with you. And so that's something that I take with me a lot. And I'll opt for something super simple as the dressing. So a squeeze of lemon, some soy sauce or tamari. I feel like this topic alone could be an entire webinar, traveling on the OMS diet. If we do that, let me know and I'll come back. But that's just kind of, and then also you can get some OMS friendly things to go. There are oil-free crackers out there that you can bring with you. And when you're out places, today people are so much more accommodating to specific diets. You know, a decade ago, if you went somewhere and asked them to make you something without oil, they thought that you were crazy. But today it's very different. And I feel like even in like fast food restaurants, some people can really do different things behind the counter to help accommodate you. And then just finally, don't be afraid to ask for what you want. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would say as well is that on the Overcoming MS website, you've got there is a really useful little list of what we eat and what we don't eat that you can actually give to restaurants. And especially if you're going on holiday maybe and staying at a hotel, or you've got time ahead of you before you're going to the restaurant, it's an easy way of showing the restaurant what you do and don't eat, and they are often very, very accommodating in making something for you, and it's also available in different languages now on the Overcoming MS website, which is great for holidays.
Thank you. It's quite timely then, Ashley, with your travel plans to ask that question. Yeah, and good tip there, Gillian, about those diet cards we've got. Somebody said, I'm allergic to nuts. What would you say is a good substitute?
I guess we can both add to this. I think it depends on what the recipe is. That's a bit of a tough one. I think that I'm trying to think of things that I think that the hardest thing to replace nuts in on a plant-based diet anyways would be a lot of these nut-based sauces. So like the creamy sauces, Alfredo sauces, I like to make with cashews, or the cheese sauces. But I think that sometimes you can omit them, and sometimes if it's for a creamy texture, you can use tofu. That silken tofu is a great option. I think that's used quite often. And then also if seeds are allowed. So if there's an allergy to nuts, a lot of times seeds or seed butters can be used in place of that quite well. So again, it depends specifically on the recipe, but I think that keeping soy and seeds in mind are good options.
And obviously the same with soy milk and soy yogurt instead of nut milks and nut yogurts. Yeah.
Thank you both. Gillian, when having fresh oily fish, I always find it difficult to determine the amount, because of course there's no label to say how many saturated fats is in it. How many grams of fresh oily fish is safe to have?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I mentioned oily fish at the beginning, and as we've said, the OMS diet recommends that we have no more than three portions of oily fish a week. I mean, and yeah, we have to be careful because of the saturated fat. I think according to the UK National Health Service, I think they say a daily portion would be for an adult would be 140 grams. And I know that different oily fish is going to vary, but if we take something like mackerel, for instance, I think you find that mackerel has about 5% saturated fat. So in fact, in 140 grams, if you take a portion there, you're probably only getting about 7 grams of saturated fat in one portion of fish. So you can see that as long as you're managing or avoiding saturated fat in the rest of your diet, to eat 3 portions of oily fish a week, you're going to be okay. You're going to be safe. It's not that it's that high in saturated fat.
Thank you. Ashley, meat alternatives. How high is high regarding inflammatory oils? You said that highly inflammatory. Could you expand on that, please?
Yes. Okay. So what I meant by highly inflammatory is that I think of foods on a scale, if you will, I suppose, being something that's, very inflammatory to something that's very anti-inflammatory. And we want to be on as anti-inflammatory possible on that scale. And there are some whole foods that we would consider inflammatory, or there are some foods that we try to avoid. So things that are higher, we don't eat too many things that are really high in saturated fat. But one of the worst offenders in terms of inflammation are these processed oils. So oils that are already gone rancid, that are high in omega-6 fats, that are full of harmful fats, and that have been deodorized. And these oils are generally what we're trying to avoid the most when we talk about processed foods. So when I say that a meat alternative is highly inflammatory, the main ingredients in a lot of these are these highly processed oils and these really, I guess, long lists of artificial ingredients. So, for example, we might say that too much omega-6 fats is inflammatory. When we're talking about a highly processed food, the damage or how inflammatory it is kind of like a different ballpark. We really want to avoid highly processed, oil-laden foods. So I guess highly processed was just a way of indicating that this is the type of food that you really do want to avoid. I don't know if that's any clearer, but again, for this person who answered the question, maybe she has a certain product in mind. I will note that, for example, I know it says on the OMS website in the dietary questions and answers section as well, that, you know, small amounts of sunflower oil that are used in certain packaged foods, you know, that are used in small amounts, that are used in the machines that make the products. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when there's like glugs and glugs of processed oil that are put into making a product. So I hope that helps.
So thank you. I'm just conscious of time. I wondered if we could just finish off with, I guess, a top tip from both of you for somebody that's new to following the OMS program and following the diet. What would be your sort of ultimate top tip or hack that you would recommend for somebody that's new?
I would say don't necessarily, don't be too hard on yourself, and take it step by step. You know, and try and find a few dishes that you really like to make, that your family like as well, and get into the habit of having those, and then slowly start adding other things in. That would be my top tip.
Thank you. And Ash,
Gillian totally stole mine. That's exactly what I was going to, I should have gone first. That's exactly what I was going to say. Get a handful of meals and just repeat those until you're comfortable. So if that one's already taken, and then also be kind to yourself. Don't stress out too much about in the beginning. I know we're so hard on ourselves to follow it perfectly. So I would say, personally for me, feeling informed was really helpful. So I think going through the website, before you dive in, if you're someone like me, like I started OMS overnight. I went cold turkey. I was like, today I'm doing it all. Give yourself a grace period to read everything, to get clear, to watch the videos, to watch some webinars, to get a good global understanding of the whole program. Because I feel like if you start right away and you feel panicked about doing everything, as new information comes at you, you have these like stressful moments of like, oh, I didn't do that, I didn't do this, I messed up that. So I think a grace period to learn as much as you can at first and print things off and make lists is probably very helpful.
Thank you. I mean, great tips there, and a lovely segue into finishing off the webinar, referring people back to all the resources that we've got out there. So I just wanted to thank you both very much for leading the session. We've had a record number of people register for the event, so there's obviously so much interest in this subject, and I'm sure there's lots more questions and lots more opportunities maybe to do a follow-up webinar to delve a bit deeper into some of the areas. So thank you very much. I'm just going to finish off and with a bit of a summary, just to say that people can book on for the next session, which is Ask Aaron. So it's your opportunity to speak to a neurologist about anything MS. Obviously, Dr. Aaron Boster is a newly appointed trustee at OMS. So that's on the 5th of December. You will, as I said, you will get a follow-up email directly from Zoom tomorrow with all the links back to the website for the replays, the handout, the PowerPoint, and we'll get those FAQs up on the website within the next couple of weeks. You can, of course, continue to support OMS by donating online, requesting the book, or listening to a podcast. So lots of things to do there. And as you will see, there's also the pop-up survey at the end. If you can feedback anything that will help us to improve the sessions, or of course, we're looking forward to the season next year. So we're looking for any sort of suggestions for topics or ideas. So thank you for that. And just wanted to thank you both very much again for a great webinar. All that talk about food has made me hungry. No, but thank you very much and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.